Okay, I'm back at least for 10 or 12 minutes. Today's the 20th of September 2017, and today I wanted to talk about a past, present, and future spread. Somebody in India had a question because she did a past, present, and future spread about a couple who were going to get married, and she wasn't sure what to do with the card with the future conditions, partly because it was swords. The beginning and the middle looked okay and friendly and happy, but the future was represented by swords, and she wasn't sure what to say about that. Although I think, okay, I think what it means is the past was good, the present's okay, but the future is going to be a little bit rocky. So don't go into the marriage thinking that everything is going to continue the way it was, because there are swords in the future. So you're going to argue, or you're going to have difficulties with other people, or whatever it happens to be, depending on the sword card. Because sometimes life can go well, and then it goes badly, and then it goes well again. And I think that's what's shown by the past, present, future spread. However, the person didn't just, past, present, future. Normally I talk about three. I pick one card for the past, one for the present, and one for the future. So we're dealing with a 3-card spread. But the person in India picked 2 cards for the past, 2 for the present, and 2 for the future. She might even have picked 3 for the present. And I don't know what order she picked it in, whether she went 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3 again, or whether she went 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. The thing is, she changed the normal method. She did it. She used a variation on the method, and then she added more cards as well, because I think she wasn't sure what to do with the first 2 cards, or the card for the past. So she picked what she called, and what a lot of people use, as clarifiers. So you pick a card, you don't know what it means, so you think, okay, I'll pick another one, and that'll tell me what the first one means. And it never works. I say never. I think it never works. You're much better off to make yourself say something sensible about the card that you don't immediately understand, and work with that information, and then develop it and relate that to the question that has been asked, instead of not knowing what the card means. And in this card, one of the cards for the past was the Page of Batons, but then the reader picked another couple of cards to clarify the 2 cards. I'm saying don't do that. And I've got a video to tell you about in a minute. So that was the situation with past, present, future. And I think what you do is you pick 1 card for the past, 1 for the present, 1 for the future. Or else you do 5 cards, 1 for the distant past, 1 for the more recent past, 1 for the present, 1 for the immediate future, 1 for the long-term future. So if you want to use more than 3 cards in a past, present, and future, think about expanding the time frame. So you can choose 7 cards or 9 cards. So 9 cards would be, but way back then. And then you've got a sequence of what you went through from way back then to not so long ago, and then yesterday, and then today, and then tomorrow, next week, next month. You can do it like that. And that's using more than 3 cards, but you're still looking for, somehow there's a method. Okay, so what I want to tell you is about this fellow called Bill Evans, who was a pianist. And he was the pianist for Miles Davis. You've probably all heard of Miles Davis. So I've been watching videos on music and jazz recently. Rick Beato is interesting. He had this thing called Why Do People Hate Jazz? And I kind of hate jazz as well. But I've been listening to different bits and pieces. So there turned out to be this fellow called Bill Evans. And on YouTube, they give you recommendations and related videos. So I often find things through related videos to what I've been actually looking at. So there's one called, and I'll put the link in the description down below, and it's by Bill Evans and Creativity or something like that. So that title caught my eye, and I watched it. So and then I had to find out who Bill Evans was. I didn't know. It's interesting that Miles Davis studied Mozart and Bach and Beethoven, so you might think that jazz is just sort of making stuff up. and improvising and think, okay, I'm just going to run my fingers up and down the keyboard and that'll be jazz. And it's all kind of random, but actually it isn't at all random. And the jazz musicians have a big, deep understanding of classical music. And so Rick Beato talked about how when the Beatles were growing up and they were young, they would hear big band music on the radio. And so when they came to write their songs, assisted to some extent by George Martin, the producer, but nevertheless, the Beatles used chords and augmented and diminished chords. They used sounds that you got from the big band that you didn't really get in modern, in pop music or in rock and roll. So that even the Beatles, or I don't say even the Beatles, but the Beatles had quite an extensive background in music and different kinds of music that they were able to draw on and create what they created. Okay, I'm getting sidetracked here. So Bill Evans, so he did this video and he talked about, so if you watch the video, it's like 4.5 minutes. So I watched it and he talks about how to improvise and he says that people, they'll try to duplicate or approximate good, fast, let's say, good jazz, and they try to get close to something that's complicated and they're happy with it. But he says you're better off to take the framework and to do something real with something simple. And if you do that, you're going to be able to build. Whereas if you go for the big sound or the big full product, then you're only ever going to get close to it, but you can't build on it because you don't know what you're doing. You don't understand what you're actually doing. But if you start with the framework, so I listened to the video, and he does a variation of a song called "I Love New York, How About You?" I think that's what it's called. It's a sort of standard from probably the 30s or the 40s. So he plays the melody. And then he does a fast, improvisation jazz. And first time I heard it, I thought it sounds okay. And then he played a different variation, but this time he stuck more closely to the framework of the actual melody. And he did something much more simple and straightforward the second time. And then he talked, and I'm going to read you something that he said. But the thing is, first time I watched it, I didn't really understand what he was getting at, but then I watched it again and a third time. And it's interesting because if the first time you watch it or listen to it, you might think that the first improvisation is really quite good. And then the second one, okay, it's good as well. But when you listen to it more than once, you realize that the first improvisation that he did isn't really very good. It might be quite impressive because it's fast, but it's really not that interesting. Whereas the second one that he does using the framework is much better. But you may not get that the first time you watch it, so you might need to watch it more than once. Okay, so Bill says, and I've got this on screen, and it is true of any subject that the person that succeeds in anything has the realistic viewpoint at the beginning and knowing that the problem is large and yet to take it a step at a time, and he has to enjoy the step-by-step learning process. And I think we can apply that approach to the tarot as well. The tarot is huge, it's this size. Can't see it, it's so big. But if we try to start off like this, we're not going to be able to build on it. Whereas if you start off like this, narrow and focused, and you take a single card and you make yourself do something with it, you're going to understand it, you're going to know it, you're going to be able to do more with it, and you're going to be able to build a platform for this kind of complicated, sophisticated reading. Then he says, it's better to do something simple that is real, and it can still be satisfactory, but is something you can build on because you know what you're doing. And this goes back to that first card in the past, present, and future spread, we get the page of buttons upright. And so the reader in India didn't quite know what to do with that. So she picked a card to clarify the first one. But what you do is you look, okay, and think of reading a card or reading cards as improvising, like they do with jazz. Although you have to study jazz if you're going to get more out of it. Okay, so you can look at that page of buttons, and what you've got is somebody, and it's a page for a young person. It's looking into the distance. There's nothing going on in the background, but there are pyramids. And it's the sort of buttons which is energy and enterprise. So you take those four, that's maybe the framework. You take those four ideas and you think about the question about marriage, and this is the past. So you've got 4 points about the card, it's the past, and it's about a question about marriage. So it's telling you something about the past. Maybe this is the early days of the relationship of the couple who are going to get married, that they were enthusiastic about each other, but they're looking into the distance. So maybe they're imagining traveling the world together or having a nice house and babies. So they're sort of projecting desired and creating a desired future. But then, if we jump ahead, so what you do is you take those ideas and you develop them, and then you look at the next card, let's say for the present, and then you do something with it. So we have to understand that, as Bill says, the problem, it's a big problem, or it's a big product. The end result's a big product. So we don't try and start off there. We start off with the framework and we build up to it bigger, wider understanding. So with that page of buttons, we've got the idea that the couple were maybe starry-eyed, as we do, you're young and in love, and, it's great. Anyway, so, but the couple have got swords in the future. So maybe what you do is you say to them, yes, you're young and in love, and you've had great ideas and painted beautiful pictures for your future, but it's not going to work like that immediately. It doesn't mean you can't have it, but don't be surprised if there are obstacles, the swords, come into play. And so you're going to have to make some harsh decisions. Going back to the contrast between standing in the desert, looking into the distance, and the Seven of Swords, I think it was, where you're face to face with awkwardness. So it doesn't mean that you're not going to get this thing, but it's not going to come easily, or it's not going to come as easily as maybe you want, or as maybe as you think. So that's taking the melody, so to speak, the question and the questioner and the past and the page of buttons, and doing something with it and developing it, and then understanding that we're doing it step by step. And it's going to take a little bit of time, but if we're willing to do it step by step and trust that we're going to get the understanding at the end, when we turn over the last card and talk about it, then we begin to put it together. It's going to work because we're building on what we know. Because the last thing that I've got here is, Bill says, that is simple enough, but I forget what that was referring to. Okay, that is simply enough, but it's within the framework of what you're doing. Whereas if you approximate something that is very advanced and you don't know what you're doing, then you can't advance or build on it. And I think that idea or that lesson is applicable to reading cards as well. So don't rush. You don't need to rush. You're going to get there eventually. It's more important to have clear, real, true ideas about what's going on in the picture. And you work with those true, clear, real ideas and do something with them and build on them. Use that as a framework rather than try to be psychic and know complete details about the final answer. You're better to work step by step towards a broader understanding or a broader answer or a more complete answer to the question, rather than try to start there and go wherever you would go beyond that point. Okay, I think that's it. I'll be back soon-ish. And if you have comments or questions, let me know. And I'm sure I had other things to say, but I've probably gone on long enough. So let me stop now, and I'll talk to you in a couple of days. Okay? Bye-bye.